Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Allen, pronouns she, her, and I am one of the co-directors of the Notebooks Collective. We are a virtual literary art space focused on community, connection, and continued learning. The Notebooks Collective believes that Black Lives Matter and acknowledges that as a virtual organization, our offices are on the lands of the Kickapoo, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket tribes. Native peoples across the world continue to persevere and celebrate their cultures, and we can encourage you to support Native writers and artists. We know these are stressful times, and we are glad that you have joined us tonight to celebrate community. I now want to welcome Becca to introduce our guests tonight.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay. Oops. Here's my introduction. So, my name is Rebecca Connors, she, her, and I am one of the co-directors of the Notebooks Collective. And I want to start with a number, 48. 48 years. That's how long our guests tonight, Mark Turcotte and Suzanne Frank, have been friends. And it is friendship that started the Notebooks Collective. And then to connect it to all, it was our solstice community, specifically Meg Carney, who brought Mark into our orbit, and with him, Suzanne Frank. I think about small actions that somehow have big impacts, how advice given or praise received can change the course of our lives. This can happen with casual acquaintances, of course, the person who emails to say they love a poem that was published in a journal they rarely purchase, or someone who trusts you enough to introduce you to someone else, someone who becomes a genuine friend. But 48 years, is there anything casual about a friendship that spanned that many years? It seems to me that a friendship that's lasted that long is one that's lasted more than just a lifetime. It's lasted several lifetimes. The few people who've known me that long have known me as a student, a waitress, a city girl, a new mom, a new writer, and they've stuck around through it all, every iteration. And sometimes they remember more about those lifetimes, those details of my life than I do. We are so grateful that Mark and Suzanne are here with us tonight to talk about their friendship and the various iterations it has seen, read their poems, and discuss what it means to write from your life, the risks of revealing who you are, getting it right or not, getting hung up on the truth, reliving hard times, resolving, forgiving. How does a friendship evolve over that many years? What if both of the people in that friendship are poets? And a lovely surprise, each poet has graciously offered to gift one signed copy of one of their books to an attendee tonight. So anyone who asks or chats a question during the question and answer segment of the program tonight will be eligible to be randomly selected to receive either a signed copy of Exploding Chippewas by Mark Turcotte or Double Vision, Reflections on the Coastal Forest and the City We Love by Suzanne Frank and Angela Just. And so now on to the formal bios. Suzanne Frank has been writing and reading her poetry in Chicago for over 30 years. Her work has been published in many poetry journals and anthologies. She is featured at poetry venues across the city, including the infamous Green Mill Lounge and the Guild Literary Complex. A residency at Shot Pouch Cabin in the Oregon Coast Range, granted by Oregon State University, resulted in a collaborative chapbook, Double Vision. Her collection of travel poems, all on the same blue planet, was featured in Nowhere magazine. Suzanne is finalizing a poetry collection, Wound Wood, that gives voices to women whose lives were hijacked by unintended pregnancy in the 1960s. She has been writing with the Chicago Egg Money Poetry Collective for nearly 20 years. Mark Turcotte, Turtle Mountain Band Anish Inabi, is author of 4 collections, including The Feathered Heart and Exploding Chippewas. His poetry and prose have appeared in Tri-Quarterly, Poetry, Kenyon Review, Plowshares, the Missouri Review, and other journals, and is included in the first Norton Anthology of Native Nations Poetry. He has been the recipient of awards from the Lannan Foundation and the Wisconsin Arts Board. He lives in Chicago, where he is a distinguished writer in residence in the English department at DePaul University. And now I welcome Mark and Suzanne.
Everybody.
I I just want to say that was
Hi.
just a lovely introduction. That was just, and what you said about friendship, it just almost made me, weep. It was a big one. That was great. Thank you, and thanks to both of you for doing this. I know you both work and you have busy lives, and to take the time to make this kind of a program available is just so selfless and wonderful. And thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with all of that. Hi, Suzanne.
Hey,
Glad
Mark.
to be here with you. Thanks to Becca and Lisa. As Suzanne and I were kind of commiserating on how we might pull this off, one of the things that we sort of became more aware of that we forget is that we had the luxury, the two of us, of being in Chicago together when in the 90s when we were both sort of deciding to really be writers and be poets and like hand ourselves over to it. And it was it was something I think that we've mostly taken for granted that we had this stunning, amazing, pulsing literary poetry community that we could just step in and out of at our leisure. And, I forget that there have been times in my life. One of the reasons I hadn't handed myself over sooner, until, that time of my life was because I'd mostly lived in places in America where I was the only poet in town, and we need to remember that there are a lot of people who um, can benefit from this sort of event, right? That Becca and Lisa are, building community, beyond, just, what's going on our immediate streets, So I felt kind of silly for not being more aware of that, that day we were talking about it there in your kitchen, so thanks for that too. And I'm glad to be with you, Suzanne.
Yeah, this is pretty exciting. you know, and I, uh, I just, I think it's so fun to have the chance to do this. I mean, prior to this meeting, though, you and I have been doing a lot of talks about what we're going to talk about, and some of the talks I think I said today, I wish we could have recorded because we had a lot of interesting communication about writing. And the funny thing is, as I mentioned to you earlier, nobody else, but um, the idea that we were poetry colleagues for so many years and talked about poetry and writing isn't really true. Um, a little bit, perhaps, but really, we talked about our lives. We talked about what was, the hard times in our lives, the good times in our lives. And we spent a lot of time in restaurants when they probably wanted us to get the hell out of there. And we'd be sitting there over a cold cup of coffee and talking, and to me,
Right.
that was wonderful.
Well, just to make sure that we're covering all the bases here, there was a time when I was a junior in high school and you were one of my brand new teachers, brand new at my school. And that's how we first got to know each other, and I was, our first moments together were you as a teacher of poetry and writing and me as a student of poetry and writing. And probably after those first 2 years of that high school experience, we were never really in that position again. Although, there were those nights like when I was on the road or living in other parts of America, I'd call you on the phone and read you a poem, and you would do the same for me. It was always like when we weren't in front of each other, but as soon as we got in front of each other, we talked about life and problems and other kind of stuff, you know. But I need to say this in a very public way, Suzanne. You know, I hold you responsible, for kind of tricking me into landing in Chicago and getting into a position in my life where I kind of had no choice. So once I was in Chicago and you started taking me to readings all over the city, I just had no choice but to like hand myself over to that. And you had been, why are you living in Texas? Why are you doing oil patch work in Montana? Like you should be doing something else, like being in Chicago. And you were right. You were right. And I'll always be grateful for that. I appreciate that a lot.
that was
So,
probably one of the
yeah,
few times in my life when nagging really worked.
yeah, true,
You know, it took a while. It took a while, but yeah.
yeah,
uh,
yeah. Thanks
And
for all the nagging. How's that?
yeah,
I should have just said that. Thanks.
yeah, yeah.
That nice way to sum it up, poet. Just thanks for all the nagging. Right. But with that in mind, do we want to share a couple things from those old days and then continue with the thing tonight, or you got something you want to share from back then? I mean, we didn't mention this, but being
Well,
in Chicago in the '90s and the poetry scene meant you were involved with like the slam scene, other performance scenes. There were, you could throw a stick and
yeah,
it would hit the window of a venue where you could read poetry and be in an open mic back then, and there were all kinds of ways um, to get yourself in front of an audience, and in every place was a different kind of audience. Some of them were slightly dangerous. Some of them were raucous. Some of them were quiet. I had somebody in the middle of reading one of my poems shout out to me, "Read slower." Like in the middle of my poem, and I stopped and I said, "Listen faster." Like it was that kind of atmosphere. That you dragged me into in Chicago after,
the open
and
mic.
you were already involved then,
Yeah,
and that stuff affected how you wrote. I mean, you had to. Not that we were trying to be like, slammy and entertaining and all that stuff, but it did affect. Things had to be stage ready, right?
yeah. And I think I do have to say here that my experience with slam poetry for myself, I can't speak for others, of course, but it was always start funny and keep it short. You know, if you were a feature, I remember Mark
Right.
Smith came up and said that we had I was featuring one night when the Cubs game got rained out and the whole audience was drunk and it was just like terrifying. And that's what he said, start funny and keep it short. And I think that's good advice no matter what, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do
Yeah.
you want to start
Well, I
with?
always say, there's a lot of things we can criticize about, that scene, but ultimately it was devoted to poetry, and there was an amazing amount of stuff that was like comic monologue, but there was a lot of stuff that was like just hardcore poetry, and
You're
I'll
right.
always be grateful for that.
Yeah. Do
You
you
want
want
to
to
read that
start?
piece before we move on?
Do you want to read yours first?
Okay, I'll do mine first since you're not jumping in the ring. This is one of the first poems I read at the Green Mill, which was the slam venue back then. There's a poem that I had to dig out of my hat. When Suzanne started taking me around to these venues to hear readings, I didn't have any poems. I hadn't been writing, so I had to like remember poems from my high school years. And essentially, I wrote this one when I was in high school. It's called Flies Buzzing. It's about being a kid on the reservation. As a child, I danced to the heartful, savage rhythms of the native, the American Indian in the Turtle Mountains, in the round hall, in the greasy light of kerosene lamps. As a child, I danced among the long jangle legs of the men down beside the whispering moccasin women in close circles around the old ones who sat at the drum, their heads tossed, backs arched in ancient prayer. As a child, I danced away from the fist. I danced toward the rhythms of life. I danced into dreams, into the sound of flies buzzing, a deer advancing, clinging to the forest wall, the old red woman rocking in her tattered shawl, the young women already bent, their breasts drooping into the mouths of their young, and the heat hanging heavy on the tips of our tongues until the sun burned the sky black and the moon made us all silvery blue, and all of the night sounds folded together with the buzzing still in our heads, becoming a chant of ghosts of Crazy Horse and Wovoka and all the endless others, weaving through the trees like beams of ribbons of light, singing, "We shall live again. We shall live again," until the sun and the sun and the sun, and I awaken, still a child, still dancing for the rhythms of life. Your turn.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
And I just have to say, I do believe that you dropped that poem on my desk in your junior year when you were in my poetry class and didn't do any of the assignments that I remember. but you used to drop these wonderful poems on my desk, and I'd be sitting there after class just blown away, right? You do remember that, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't keep you from giving me a D or an
I think
F or
you
something.
got a D minus, I think, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, and after that, I really hate to read this, but this is a poem that I wrote about Lansing, Michigan, where I grew up. It was an Oldsmobile factory town, and all the guys I went to high school with pretty much graduated and went into the factory. And it was a good living, and there were a lot of good things about it, but it was just a deadly, deadly job. So this is called Lansing, Michigan, 1965. The men I knew got lost, like life took parts of them away. Oh, I've got an echo. Do you hear that? No echo?
Mhm.
Hearing an echo. I'm going to start over, sorry. The men I knew got lost, like life took parts of them away. All those pieces that were there when they were dark-headed, silent boys got lost in 30 years of 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. 1 hour for lunch, fix the sink, mow the lawn, and never enough money or love. The men I knew lost pieces in factories, got twisted and maimed inside and out, got up before light, worked all day. When they came home, they looked like they'd been whipped. The men I knew joined the army right out of school, lost pieces in Vietnam, hauling rifles high over their heads, waist deep in fear. The men I knew dropped out and dropped acid until their eyes lost their language and they tangled in dreams and drank all night in corner bars, picked fights looking to find those pieces they feared were lost forever. The men I knew wore out sooner, lost so many pieces, fretting about money and going to war every single day.
Action claps on that one.
I have to,
I tell my students that, go ahead, sorry.
no, I hesitated to read this. We just decided to do this today, but I got a lot of comments from the audience, not about what a great poem it was, but how that was what they experienced, in their lives, in their early lives. They had some very similar experiences, and that's always kind of gratifying.
Yeah, well, as long as you were reaching people, that was the whole idea, right? Why stand on a stage in front of a bunch of people without reaching them?
Right.
And everybody has their own way of doing it.
Yeah.
But thanks for a little stroll down memory lane. So you want to read some more poems? You want to talk about the scars?
Yeah.
We realized as we were talking about our writing, like, wow, we write a lot about our scars, both of us. And sometimes, I teach at DePaul University, so I get a lot of young people's opinions about poetry, especially about old people's poetry. And not all of them, but once in a while I hear this thing of like, the last thing in the world I want to hear is like 60-year-olds writing about when they were 10, or something like that, and it's like, well, when you're 60 and you have something that you want to say out loud about when you were 10, I'll be there and I'll listen. I will, because I think it's important. I don't think I'll be there, but anyway, I've always believed, that mining the past, no matter how deep the scars or not deep the scars, is worthy your whole life. If you're not looking back at your life, and contemplating it and thinking about it, I mean, then what are you doing? You know? So we had this idea, this sort of, I mean, it's kind of not really a theme, but this idea of the scars, right, Suzanne?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that you're right that for me that's why I write much of the time, and that is to kind of work out what those scars are about, and how it affected my life, and the word trajectory comes to mind because there can be something that happened 20 years ago, something someone said to me, that just blew me out of the water, and I was on it was always there. It could always come to the top again. And I think, it stays with us. It rocks our confidence, and it can be a lifelong thing. Like some of the poems I'm going to read tonight are the product of being pregnant at 19 and marrying someone who we'd been together since we were 15. Okay, but we were just beginning to kind of separate, and he didn't want to be married, and it was something that I've never stopped feeling, I guess, not being wanted in that way. So, but so I'm going to start with just a short. It's not a poem, but I'm in the landscape world from my profession now, and one of the things I pay attention to is trees. And this poem is about woundwood, a tree, that's something that happens to trees. You can tell how old a wound is by how thick the woundwood forms around it, how well it shields the point of injury, protects the naked sapwood. It takes the shape of the wound. My friend says they look like vaginas, or what Edvard Munch saw on the fjord that night, a scream passing through nature.
Thanks. And so in my book, the Exploding Chippewas, the section of what I'm calling back when poems begins with this little quick story about myself and another native writer sitting in a kind of a divey bar in Uptown in Chicago back in the early 90s. And this is just a quickie, almost like a play, like a scene from a play. But it says what I need to about scars. First Indian, the scar on my lip. Oh, I got that when I was a kid on the res. That's where I got most of my scars, at least the ones you can see. Second Indian, yes, on the res, back when you used to be Indian. First Indian and second Indian both laugh. I'm going to enjoy listening to you read some poems, Suzanne. Thanks. I'll see you in a minute.
So I mentioned that the poems I'm going to read are about the early years of my life, and the pregnancy and the marriage and such. But back in 1965, 66, premarital pregnancy was not accepted, and it was a trauma, and it was something that made you feel you had to hide, and you had to you just weren't acceptable somehow. And I think that's changed. I mean, how many times do we see on the news, especially the movie stars and stars? I mean, it doesn't. A lot of people don't get married. They get pregnant. They have relationships, but they don't get married. But that's not how it was back then. And I felt a lot of discrimination, and I felt a lot of like I was a bad person. So this first poem is very short, but it's called Bad Apple. She is not round or red or smooth-sided. She is spotted. She is bruised and misshapen. She is hurled about, thrown out. She is blessed among women. She is blessed among the fallen ones. I don't know how many of you people recognize that she is blessed among women, but it always, I think about Mary and being pregnant, and whether there was ever any repercussion in that way. How'd this happen? and whether she was discriminated against. You never read anything about that, but it's just something I think about. This next poem is called Shotgun Wedding. And if you want to hear something or see something that's really obnoxious, Rod Stewart in 1965 put out a song called Shotgun Wedding. And in this, it's a video, it's a music video. And he's got teeth blacked out and he's got a, hayseed hat on. And it's just, it's just so ugly. It's like the only people who have shotgun weddings are these people who are, not real smart, not real on top of life. So, shotgun wedding. She keeps it a secret for as long as she can. As her waist thickens and clothes don't fit, and food makes her gag, and her breasts swell and ache. Midnight calls to his barracks, saltines in her pocket, failing grades in school. She fails everything except the baby she carries with her each day like a small purse. She buys a white dress with a high waist, finds a minister to marry them, a cake, a photographer. She tells her mother, who is reading in a favorite chair, who is smoking and content. Then there is no air in the room. Nobody can breathe. Words are fearsome. She cries as she walks the aisle, and her father cries too and pats her hand. The minister stumbles on their names. The photographer shoots pictures of her puffy face, red-rimmed eyes, her mother's frozen smile. All miserable, except for Granny in her red pillbox hat, who seems to be having a pretty good time. I have to laugh because I had to put the Granny thing in because we have a lot of pictures of this dismal event, right? And Granny just stood out in all of them. She was just having a ball. I don't know, she didn't get out much or something, this was really fun for her. That was my husband's grandmother, quite a character. The next poem is about how the story continues and pregnancy changes everything. And I looked up the word shape-shifting, and this is one of the definitions. It's when a form is taken involuntarily. The effect can be one of confinement and restraint. The person is bound to the new form. And I thought that's pretty apt for the way I felt in this next stage during this period. The poem is called Shape-Shifting. She wonders at how her body can change so. She is deformed, ungainly, shrouded in awful polyester smocks. She does not glow like Madonna, but sweats in a Florida 3-room rental, where she no longer cares about cockroaches, the unmade bed, how late she sleeps, how late he comes home, or where he was. She disappears into the turquoise walls, stands heavy like a cow, no longer buoyant, having forgotten the wind, to be sure. And I just mentioned the polyester smocks because in today's world, the pregnancy is honored. Women wear tight clothing so you can see the whole pregnancy. You can see the the way that she looks, and it's a beautiful thing. But back when I was pregnant in 1967, literally you hid your pregnancy. You did not show it, and nobody wanted to see it. They didn't want to see your swollen belly. So that's a big change and a good change. So this is something else that I read recently. I was reading about changes in attitudes toward childbirth and over the years. And many of you may know that when in the 1940s and 30s, I believe, women were given ether during delivery. And they were, I don't know how that works. How could you not participate and have a baby be born? I don't know. But that's what they did. And drugs were a big part of childbirth. And then it changed in the 70s, and then you had Lamaze, and you had a lot of really positive things happening. And I was kind of in the middle of that. I think there were some pain drugs, but not too much. But this is one of the things that it says in general about childbirth. I just love this. This is childbirth is labor intensive, tiring, sweaty, bloody, and it's a personal form of women's work. I love that, women's work. Oh. An inevitable task for the pregnant woman that cannot be delegated. Wouldn't you like to? Anyway, this is about my mother. I knew very little about what to expect, but my mother did say a couple things to me, and this is about my mother's warning. Her mother's warning. Fearsome, knuckles down, gravel road pain pins her to the gurney in glaring light, naked and sprawled. Her mother warned her it would not be a picnic. Not a picnic, her mother said. That it would rip her apart, take her breath, drown her, leave her empty and washed to shore, where she would see the child. Warm, muscular, waxy, squalling, the child she feared, the child that stretched her flat stomach to make his impossible nest, that fought his way to the light to grasp her finger and not let go. So this last poem is about the first couple weeks after bringing my son home. And I had been a student at the university for 2 years, and I was hungry for knowledge. I was hungry for my mind to be occupied with something other than just the daily routines of taking care of a house and taking care of a baby, even though I accepted that as my lot. So I used to watch a program that was around in 1967 on television when, into that, Sunrise Semester. Some of you may know about that. I don't know, 1967. So the title is Sunrise Semester, 1967. He sleeps in a used buggy, as if she didn't expect him, as if he just appeared like magic to be held and fed. And when he wakes before dawn, she rolls him to the kitchen and warms his bottle, and they sit in front of the portable TV to watch Sunrise Semester with the professor who lectures on Joyce's Ulysses. And she half listens while he memorizes her face, because she is all he has in this world, and he is heavy in her arms. It is September, and 2 weeks ago he didn't exist. And they are both ignorant, both operating on instinct and hormones. And the professor says, life is all a stream of consciousness, a jumble of happenstance. And the mother and child both doze and twitch in their own pre-dawn dreams. And just to go on record, of course, I mean, this is obvious, I guess, but regardless of how the circumstances under which you have a child, you love that child. And of course, I love my son. And it was hard. It was very hard, but it was what it was. And I got him. So that's a good thing. And now I'm going to switch gears to to a poem that I'm reading of Mark's, because I read through Mark's books before, over the past couple of weeks. And this poem just really stood out to me as just such a beautiful poem about a relationship between a parent and a child, or lack thereof. And it touched me very much. It's called Hands. Old man, I stood over you in your box. And when I reached to touch your gray folded hands, I remembered a fair summer day beside big water when you laughed and lifted me higher than the trees. And I felt like a big boy. I felt like a big boy. In your hands, I felt like a good boy. And you said, hey, Chipua, do you see any angels up there? Do you see any angels? Old man, I leaned over you in your box, touched my hands into your thin gray wave of hair. And I whispered, may the grandfathers give you feathers. All is forgiven down here. From Mark. Such a beautiful poem. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mark. Yeah?
Thanks, Suzanne. About a round for Suzanne, everybody in our little spaces all over the country. Thanks. You've been getting some really nice chats, Suzanne. See you in a couple more minutes. Thanks for doing that. Thanks again for everybody. I appreciate it. I hope I've been getting some frozen moments. I hope it's not just my laptop. I mean, I don't know if other people have been seeing that, but I'm just going to try to forge through here as best I can. I read that poem, Flies Buzzing, earlier, and I wanted to read one more from my book, The Feathered Heart, which was my first book. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm often embarrassed. I guess I mentioned it a little bit earlier about having to read poems that I wrote in high school. A couple of my most anthologized poems over the years are two poems that both of them I wrote when I was like 16, 17. And so sometimes I wonder, like, it seems like the poems that people like best by me, I wrote when I was 16. It's kind of a weird feeling when you look back at your so-called career, right? But I wanted to read one more very pivotal poem for me. This is about being a kid on the res, I guess. And actually, it's about an experience I had later when I had left the reservation and moved into the white world, so to speak, and was back on the res for an elder's passing, and I was hanging out with some of my peers on the res. This is called Indian Boys. One little, two little, three little, four little, five little, six little, seven little, eight little, nine little, 10 little. Under the moon, that perfect ruby sky fruit, Indian boys pace or carve through the nightness in rusted cars, their thick lips wetted, glistening with the breath of sick roses and bad wine, while one sad feather swings upside down from their rear view mirror, brushing Catholic dust from the head of a cracked and yellow dashboard Madonna. Speaking of Madonna images, Suzanne, there's my Madonna image for you. I don't know how many of you remember that grew up with cars that had steel dashboards, and people would put magnetic religious icons across so that when your face smashed into the steel dashboard, you had some saints there to make you feel better, I guess. But it's amazing what we did to ourselves, what we exposed ourselves to. So I'm going to read a few of those back when poems, that I mentioned earlier. The moment when this guy said to me, "Oh yeah, back when you used to be Indian," and I stole his insult at me and wrote 22 poems that all start with the line "back when I used to be Indian," and that's all I'll say about that and that insult. And in the book, they're like chronological. So this one sort of begins with my birth, and then they just kind of move along over time. Continue. Back when I used to be Indian, I am reaching toward the light with both fists, yawning, growling like a flower. Mother pushes me, gasping. Mother pushes me again. I swim out from muffled cradle, dripping blood, salt of the very first flood, first wound. I uncurl upon her island shore. I breathe. Mother pulls me, gasping. Mother pulls me again to her weeping breast. I drink and begin with one shaky eye to search for my father. The room rattles with empty. In the hallway, hoofbeats fade. Millions begin to cry in my veins. Gravity. Back when I used to be Indian, I am counting the stars in the night of my mother's eyes. 5, 4, 3. Her husband is heaped in the corner, chains rattling in his throat. She groans and lifts herself finally from the floor. A bone explodes. She begins to spin. 2, 1. The darkness pulls me. Another glowing cinder drops out of the sky. Visitation. Back when I used to be Indian, I am 6, maybe 7 years old, restless, pretending to sleep in the dry glow of the cast iron stove. My sister's back is warm and still against my own. A straw in the blanket scratches my ankle. Somewhere in the darkness, my mother and her husband grunt and hiss, hands over mouths. I blink. Across the room, a buffalo snorts, nudges the yellow Tonka truck with its nose. I'm going to give myself a chance to take a sip of Fresca here, which I forgot to do. There's a funny little thing about that poem, Visitation, is that when a very nice thing happened to me, I had a French writer named Dominique Faulkner who approached me about translating some of my poems, and he asked if he could do it, and then maybe we could put together a little manuscript, and we did that. So there was kind of a best of Turcotte very early on that was published in France in a book called Le Chant de la Route, and some of these poems were in it. And when he came to that Visitation poem, he called me and he said, "Hey, what do you think about changing the title of that poem, Visitation? Because like in France, the phrase, that phrase or that thought of visitation really only refers to one thing, which is, the appearance of the Virgin." And I said, well, for a Northern Plains Ojibwe, a buffalo pushing your toys around your house at night is as good as any visitation from the Virgin. So I'm going to stick with that title, and and the French people will just have to, the French will just have to deal with it, and it turned out okay. There were at least 2 people that bought the book in France, and nobody complained, so it worked out all right. Another back when poem. This one's called Battlefield. As Suzanne and I have been talking about knowing each other for 48 years, both of us are in a place in our lives where, we're losing people, and I've lost I've lost all of my siblings and sort of all of like in a rush, it kind of happened too soon. It's always too soon, I guess. But my sister, Jackie, was one of those people who, being 5 years older than me, just about every memory I have of childhood, she's somewhere on the fringe of it, whether she was immediately involved with me or whatever, she's always there. And her passing seems to have left like the largest hole in a way, because there's so many times when I think, oh, Jackie will know the name of that thing that we did. And then I realize, oh, Jackie's not here to for me to ask that question to anymore. And one of my most vivid memories of her from our childhood is she always had these, she was white on both sides of her heritage, and she had the whitest, pinkest legs you could imagine. She was a little sort of strawberry blonde, and she always had these little white socks and blue sneakers. And I'll just always remember that thing. And this is me remembering her little blue sneakers and her white socks and her little pink legs. And then in my own twisted poetry way, this is the poem that I wrote about those, which aren't in the poem at all. Battlefield for Jackie. Back when I used to be Indian, I am standing outside the pool hall with my sister. She, strawberry blonde, stale sweat and beer pours through the open door. A warrior leans on his stick, fingers blue with chalk. Another bends to shoot. His braids brush the green felt, swinging to the beat of the jukebox. We move away. Hank Williams falls again in the back seat of a Cadillac. I look back. A wind off the distant hills lifts my shirt, brings the scent of wounded horses. Uh, just about everything I write begins with some image that inserts itself into me, makes itself known to me. And I usually, most of the time I know what they are immediately, but sometimes they're not quite so obvious. And then later, when I realize what they are, I'm sort of almost embarrassed at how I didn't recognize something that was so important to me. I'm going to do one more back when poem as a way of kind of illustrating this idea. It's called Harvest. And when I was a kid, we would leave the res and go work in the migrant camps of Idaho and California, Northern California. And this is about a migrant camp in Idaho when I was a kid. And there's an image of orange soda pop. And this probably the strongest image of my entire life is the image in this poem. Back when I used to be Indian, I am squinting into the sun where a great bird is disappearing. The furrows of the field stretch out to a darkening horizon. The people, every shade of brown, stoop to dig potatoes from the earth. Armando sits astride the sputtering tractor, his long black fingers wrapped around a bottle of bright orange soda. He grins, his mouth filled with gaps and gold, offers down a drink. I take a sip. The heavens cough and let loose the storm. A jagged tooth slides down my throat between the drops of rain. Feathers fall in flames. That image of that worker, obviously he was a Mexican worker, sitting on top of that tractor in his just dark brown skin and that orange soda pop and the sun, and it's I put it in a short story. It's in a novel that I thought I was working on. I'm not sure if I'm still working on it. But it's a really vivid moment for me. It might even have been like that moment when I started realizing like something about color, like how to even perceive the world or something. It's really pivotal stuff. So we'll get off the back wind track a little bit. I'm getting close to wrap up time here. Um, I was lucky enough to, I would never call it a friendship by any means, but I got to know Jim Harrison, the great American writer, a little bit. Um, and he was a really interesting guy to know. And he gave me a blurb for Exploding Chippewas, and was just really nice to me about my work and stuff. We had Michigan after I left the reservation when I was a kid, which was in North Dakota. I grew up in Michigan, so we both had Michigan in common a little bit. And he loved the UP, and I loved the UP. And I was actually living in Door County, which is not the UP, but anyway, I was living in Door County he and I kind of became friends a little bit. And he's the person who said like some of the most amazing things to me, like, don't forget that you're a working man, unlike most poets. And that's the thing that'll keep you from becoming a limp sack of shit like most poets. Like good practical life advice like that from Jim Harrison. He also said, he thought I was probably the only poet he knew who could move my own furniture, which he was right. It's always been hard for me to get people to help me move my furniture. Anyway, he passed, and an old friend of mine, good friend of mine, Steve Grutzmacher from Door County. The best thing about Door County for me was is Steve Grutzmacher. He solicited me for a poem to put in Door County Living magazine, which is at the time I was like, God, that would be like having a poem in like Kitchens Monthly or something. I mean, it would just be so weird and glossy and amazing. So I had to say yes, and they gave me a photo as a prompt, and and I wrote this piece about Jim Harrison after he passed. It's called Autumn Door. For Jim Harrison in the swoon. Have we, whether a step just within, just without, finally arrived in this place to linger, maybe never pass, only dwell between our own autumn and the autumn we have made of memory, the autumn of time and one timeless, within the deep and smoky season where so many things have gathered now to await our grieving, our letting go of everything gone. Listen to us, rattle laughter of leaves, throaty lowing of white pines and crisp lean. Gone our father, mother's hazel eyes, gone our little brother in the murky river, gone big sister sticking out her tongue, gone our child startled by the sky, gone lovers, gone our winding way, gone the mad woodsman scribbler, old trickster, boy, wolf, bird, and then the thin and blurry season where so many things have gathered now to await our return, our rewaking of everything still. Look at us, a flash of something like ourselves, our once leaping selves abandoned to joy. Still our mother, father's hoarse chuckle, still our little brother of the splashing river, still big sister sticking out her tongue, still our child in the startled sky, still those lovers, still our winding days. Still the mad woodsman, poeteer, old trickster, boy, wolf, bird. We could fly. Don't you remember? We plunged into the brittle, paused between soar and dive. We curled up and sprung, hung like breath in the air. We lingered there, maybe never passed, and also born, wombed in space. Again, thanks, Jim Harrison, for the ways you touched my life. I appreciate it. So I just lost track of what I was doing. Sorry. Oh, here it is. And before I close, I'm going to do a piece by Suzanne, but really quickly, I want to do this piece. It's called Invitation. Can't remember the last time I read this poem out loud. That's why I'm doing it. Truth is, I don't know where I'm going. I've admitted this from the start. I've spoken of my endless spinning that compasses made crazy when held against the magnet of my mad and aimless heart. I've been lost to everyone at least twice, to myself more times than I can count. I've been blind to the signs, crossed against every light, ignored the clanging signals, turned left even when I knew it wasn't right. It's true that you would never want to be any of the places I've been. I've stumbled in meadows set afire with the breath of angry angel grasshoppers, pressed the skin of my neck and knuckles against their razor wings. I've skidded wheels over spiral roads, lined them with the wreckage of twisted bone and flesh. I've heaped the ditches full with ghosts who called me lover, ghosts who called me daddy, ghosts who never called me daddy. I've plunged into the roiling hive, face first into every rocky shore. I've been to the bottom of every darkly shining sea. It's true. I don't know where I'm going. I've been a bad navigator, but now I'll ask you to come with me anyway. I've recently learned, I've studied the charts and maps, and my old hands are somehow so much more quiet on the wheel, my sail more true against the sky. Please don't ever call me captain, but come with me. Let's begin now. Look at all those stars scattered across the night water. Just listen to them whisper and bump against the bottom of our boat. And now a piece by my friend Suzanne. Needs no explanation. House on Fire, Guam, 1968. They said your house is on fire, which was not exactly right. They should have said it is gone along with everything inside, every book, fork, pot, cup, picture, the gun hid under the bed, the rat that foraged the kitchen, termites that buzzed in the walls. They should have said it was always smoldering, that it stunk of something rotting, sweet soaked, sweat soaked sheets, beer and cigarettes, that it was drunken and wailing, it was doors slammed shut and don't ever come back. It was hard rain and rain and rain. It was nowhere to breathe, no walls to lean on, no shelter from the moon with its unblinking eye. Suzanne Frank. Thanks for listening, everybody. I guess we're gonna chat just for another second, maybe. You're muted. Mhm. Thanks, friend. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm waiting for you to respond.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Oh,
So that was fun. Thanks. How you feeling?
wow. Hearing you read that poem was really special. You know, I knew your voice would work on it. You know, that was great. Thank you for doing
I
that.
love the images in that piece. It drives. It has a drive. It was really easy to read.
We talk
But you can
about
go ahead and keep being humble about it. Go ahead. It's all right.
one
You're
of the
allowed.
one of the things we said we were going to talk about is, you know, kind of the pros and cons of, I know you don't like to call them this, but memoir poems or poems about our lives. And I don't know if there are any poems that aren't about the writer's life in one way or another, but um, I've had times, and I've talked to you about this, where I thought, ooh, I didn't know who to invite to this because I thought there were people I didn't want to see that part of me, you know, and that you
Yeah.
can't have that if you're going to go forward with writing, that's for sure. But what do you think about that?
Well, like we were saying, I mean, it's funny, like we have this like 48-year history, right? Which sort of began with teaching and learning, mostly me from you, and then slowly transitioned, to us being more like peers and equals, I guess, in the world, right? And then when I landed in Chicago, you were like already several years ahead of me as far as being in the poetry scene and knowing what that was like. And but I jumped in, pretty quick. I think I adapted pretty well, and um, both of us, our work has changed dramatically since those days. And I think overall, what I've done, has been, quite a bit more public than what you've done. So like like in this situation here, I feel like, I don't know, I said I've done this kind of thing like over 500 times, probably, and then you were a little bit more nervous about it than I was, and it took me a minute to realize like, well, this isn't the kind of thing that that you do so often. But I never, unlike you, I never worry about what someone's going to think about one of my poems and what I say in my poems, and I think I've been that way forever. I never was a person who worried about peer pressure. I never considered myself like I wasn't in any clique. I was my own clique. So I didn't care, what people thought of me and stuff. I guess I just, it was like the defense mechanism early on, especially transitioning from reservation life to the white world. That was a tough time. So, I got thick, really, I got cactus boy, I used to say, I'm like a cactus on the outside, all mushy on the inside, but all prickly on the outside. I've never had to experience that. So when you brought it up about, well, I'm going to be saying some things in a couple of these poems that people don't know necessarily about me, and and it's like, well, why haven't they been paying? My reaction is, why haven't they been paying attention? You know, and it's like, I could say, someone has known me for 20 years. If they don't know this stuff about me by now, then they haven't been paying attention to me. What kind of friendship have we had, right? And I know I'm just applying my own ideas to this, and no, you're obviously allowed to feel the way you do about it, but I'm glad it seems like you're sticking with your poems though, right?
Yeah, although there were some poems I didn't read because of
Oh,
that.
okay.
Yeah,
Right.
so, oh
Right.
well, yeah, but
Yeah.
I'm getting to understand that more, and I think I can
Yeah. Okay.
overcome it, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But, I also think uh, one of the things about this kind of poetry for me is it helps me work through things. And going back, for the manuscript that I'm writing, going back to 1967 and really looking at all the things that happened and looking at them with really kind of an impartial eye, and also not making myself the hero, like or the victim, and just looking at it in a cold hard way. And I've learned a lot. I think I've come to understand a lot of what happened and how it affected me and so on much better than I would have had I not written those things.
Hmm. Well, I'm glad to hear that because I don't, I mean, isn't it kind of late to start, like letting things interfere with what we decide we're going to write about? It's kind of too
I
late for
think
both of
so. I
us,
think you're right. Yeah,
right?
right.
And it's certainly, like when I encounter young people who want to express themselves in writing, sometimes they bring up this idea like, well, I want to write this poem about something that my mother's not going to like, and I'm like, well, don't show your mother. Where's your mother going to find your damn poem? I mean, are you going to put it in the, even if it gets published in the New Yorker, your mother doesn't read the New Yorker. I mean, like, you know what I mean? It's like they worry about things that are, and it's not just young people. I've been at conferences where I've had 40-year-old show me their manuscript and they even have a cover for it. They're so ready for it to be out in the world, they even have a cover for it, but then they're worried about how their grandma's going to feel. And I'm like, sorry, pardon my French, but screw your grandmother. She doesn't know, she doesn't even read poetry. She might, if you send her this link, she's not here tonight. I guarantee it. You know what I mean? It's like most people don't care.
That's right.
And often they don't get it, so the thing that you're worried they're going to discover about you, they don't even notice, so don't let that stuff get in the way.
Yeah.
That's
And I
my big
also,
lesson for first day of intro to poetry for you, Suzanne.
I have a question about
Yeah.
writing that kind of poem. Do you write to help people understand your perspective as an Indigenous person?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know, that's the hardest question ever because I feel like I write any of us right. I mean, initially I started writing because I needed somebody to talk to, you know, when I was a kid. So I don't think that's true anymore, but I keep writing. Even when I don't like writing sometimes, like, who cares? I'm sick of myself and my poetry. And often what happens is somebody from out of the blue, like the Notebooks Collective, they contact you and remind you that you're a writer. And you go, oh, right, that's right. I'm a writer. I'll do that thing. And then other people, like, I would love to have the chat from this session because I want to read all these things I've been getting glimpses of amazing things that people were saying about your poems. And you need to read them too. It's really amazing how people have been reacting to your work. It's great. I'm proud of you.
Well, I've been telling people I'm going to be reading with a rock star, and that kind of freaks me out, that you have done just amazing.
Reading with a what? You froze right when you said reading with a
Oh,
something.
okay. Reading with a rock star,
Oh,
feeling like the warm up band, but it's wonderful, and I used to be jealous of you, and feel like the student way surpassed the teacher, And now I'm just happy for it. And I just think having your work in the world is the best thing ever, because of
Yeah. Well, thanks.
your sentient
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah.
And
I was thinking about this stuff about life, like we've known each other for 48 years, and in that brilliant introduction that we heard tonight, um, it was said like through changes, which you sort of forget, like all the times we always remember when we started over in our life. But when you started thinking about, oh, geez, oh, Pete, how many times did you start over, Suzanne? And um, like you gotta be aware of those things. And we haven't always been the same people. We've changed over time, but we've stuck it out together somehow. Sometimes change is kind of like people disappear, but I guess to both of our regrets, we haven't disappeared from each other's lives. We're just always there. And so, yeah, and
yeah,
I'm always grateful.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah.
And I hope it
Well,
continues.
we were hoping that maybe we could, after we get done reading a couple more poems, maybe we could have like an out loud, maybe chat or answer a couple questions, I think. Do you want to do your wrap up couple pieces?
Yeah, I'm just going to read a short one that these are newer things that I've written. And I just, kind of part of the learning of this program, talking about process, I use my notes in my phone and I see things. I get them at least started when I'm right in the moment and then go back and add to them later. But one of the things I do is sit out on my back deck and I have a bird feeder and I have a tree out there. I see a lot of birds and I study them. I'm not a birder in the sense that I want to keep a list of all the birds I've seen over the years, but I'm learning about them and the things that I learn um, in observing. I call them my flock because I think they're the same birds that have been here for 2 or 3 years. They do live that long. We forget that, and they do. The birds that I see are ones that stay through the winter besides. And, I learn about dominance. I learn when they molt and how ugly they are when they do that. They have a lot of stages they go through that I've had the ability to observe over the years. And one of them, well, I'll just read the poem. This poem's called Discard Pile. Birds are quiet in early summer, not wishing to draw attention to hatchlings whose scrawny necks wave above the nest, clown mouths open, bulbous eyes sealed blind, except to the shadows of mother with an insect dangling. Open wide, your job is to stay alive and get fat. Oh, and learn to fly and sing. And it won't be easy, and some will fail to thrive, and some will die. But isn't that just the way of nature, how it picks and chooses, throws some in the discard pile, while others carry on swooping here and there without a thought of falling?
Is that it?
Yeah. Well, I have another one, but
Thanks.
you do one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So sometimes I'm lucky enough in the world that people want to like talk about my poems on podcasts and things like that, and I never get used to figuring out when I should and shouldn't do that because often, no offense, but what non-native people sometimes have to say about the work of native people is kind of strange sometimes. So I was lucky enough recently for the the folks at Poetry Unbound to Patrick Otwama and those folks to be interested in a poem of mine that was on Poem a Day going like a year and a half ago. It's one of my newer poems, so I thought it would be a good contrast. Plus, they did an amazing job. I was like stunned and amazed at the podcast that they did back in July. It's a poem called Dear New Blood, and basically is born out of this feeling that I've had for quite a while of often, I'll be at some small college somewhere doing a reading or a big college or wherever I'm doing a reading. And you always get this feeling that there are a couple native people in the room And, there's always just a couple of us, I mean, there's always just a couple of us. And sometimes I get the feeling like they don't want to be there. Like because there's this native poet on campus, everybody's pushing them to go and, be at the reading. And then the last thing they want is to sit and listen to, some old guy. So this poem is born out of that feeling, but also, um, with all sorts of love and empathy, because this poem is to them and to my 17-year-old self. Dear New Blood, you don't need me, I know, here on this podium with my poem. You hunched in the back of the room, tilted in your lean reservation lean. You ho-hum your gaze out the window toward some other sky. Dear New Blood, dear holy, dear fully mixed up, mixed down, mixed in and out blood, go ahead and kick the shit. Kiss the shit from my ears. I swear I'll listen. Stutter at me, you uptown weed, you thorn, you petal, aim my flowered face at the sky. I know you don't need me here on this podium with my poem. You pressed flat to the wall, shoulders cocked, loaded for makwa, old growlers like me. You yawn your glance out the window at the tempting sky. Wake me, bang my dead drum clang, my anvil, my bell, shout me, hush me, your song, your shiny, impossible, your long, wounded song. Tell me everything you know. You don't. Tell me, do you feel conquered and occupied? Maybe I've forgotten. Sing it plain. Has America ever been America to you? Let you be you in your own sky. Sing deep Chaco, deep Minneapolis, deep Standing Rock, deep Oakland and LA, sing deep Red Cliff, sing Chicago, deep Acoma, deep Pine Ridge and Tahlequah, sing and mourn. I think you too were born with broken heart. Rise, smash your un-American throat against the edge of the reddening sky. So thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate it.
I'm going to go in here because we
Yeah.
have quite a few questions. We're going to try to get through as many as we can, and I will read them off randomly to you if that sounds okay. Sharon asks, Mark, you keep mentioning handing yourself over to poetry, which is an interesting phrasing. Is poetry something we give ourselves to, a choice, an acquiescence, something that chooses us? Just curious about both of your thoughts on that.
Mine is pretty cool. Thought about this a lot. I've known that I was going to be a writer ever since I first learned to read out of my Yogi Bear coloring book when I was on the res, when I was 4 years old on the res. I knew I was going to be a writer. The Feathered Heart, I knew was going to be the title of a book of mine someday. And that all was great until I became a teenager and I found myself in a world that didn't want me to be wonderful and didn't want me to be a writer. And, teachers who, literally had no idea what I was talking about or thinking about in my writing. Unlike Suzanne, I had other kinds of teachers first. But the world in general doesn't want you to be a poet, doesn't want you to be wonderful. And I got sucked in by that and sort of gave up on it, like and buried like what was really probably the best thing about myself. I buried it hoping that my life would be more satisfying without that nagging, and the poetry, the art, whatever, the voice was always there saying, let me out, let me out, let me out. And it was finally when I got to Chicago and I just started saying, okay, I hand myself to you. And it's one of the things I say to my students in other terms, which is, I know that you already are a writer and you know a lot about writing, but let's all gather here in this room and agree to hand ourselves over to something that's going to happen in this room over the next 10 weeks or whatever. So this idea of handing oneself over has become kind of an idea that travels in other areas of my life. But certainly, I feel like that's what I had to do. Like, I've always had to like have some voice from deep and within, like keep me from doing the stupid things I keep doing over and over. Like hey, I'll kill the best part of myself so be happy. It took me forever to go like, hey, I'll free the best part of myself. Maybe that'll make me happy. Anyway, sorry. How about you, Suze?
Um, I feel like I've been a writer since I was 12 years old, but not in a big way or anything. But it's always been my preferred way of expressing myself, I think. I never call myself a poet, never did for a long, long time because it makes me uncomfortable. But now, I've been so lucky in Chicago to have some wonderful writing groups to work with. And the one I'm in now, the Egg Money poetry group, is just wonderful because there are 5 of us, and we're friends, and we're serious about writing, and inspirational to one another. And it's really amazing to be part of the writing community, for one thing, because I love writers. I love how they think. I want to be around them as much as I can, and I think that's a lot of it. But I just feel really lucky being in Chicago for that reason, because there's so much poetry in Chicago and so many wonderful poets. So yeah, whatever. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's my thinking.
Oh, really, really quickly, I want to add this. One of the things that Susanna and I have just sort of realized over this, couple weeks of getting ready to do this thing is that she and I need to spend more time talking about poems. Like,
Yeah,
why don't we do this more often that we were saying to each other, right? So
yeah, it's
I
true.
know there's no room in the egg collective, I know there's no room for old guys like me in there, but we'll make our own little
Yeah, yeah,
poetry workshop together. Okay, thanks.
yeah.
Well, Mark, that's a really great lead in for another question, which is, what's your favorite of each other's poems? What's the brightest poetry-centric memory that pops up to you, and vice versa, to both of you?
You go first.
Well, it's not one, and not that I didn't like the ones Mark read tonight. I love them all, but one of them that I really loved was when Mark wrote a poem about visiting his mother when she was dying in the hospital, and giving her a foot massage, something as earthy as that. And it was just so beautiful. I couldn't read it without crying, not ever, so I'd say that stands out for me a lot.
Well, that's sweet of you. I like that. That piece has a special place for me too. Just it was also not just rubbing feet, but clipping toenails. That
Oh,
was
yes,
the
right, yeah. That was,
you gotta include that detail. That's a
yeah,
good one.
yeah.
I gotta say, this has been sort of the thing that has happened with Suzanne and I a lot. She isn't as public with her poems as I've been. So most of the poems that I love of hers are things that I've heard her read out loud and then I've never seen on the page.
Oh,
And I don't want to get, too weird about this, but all I'll say about this poem is that there's a poem that she wrote about a friend who passed, that I've always been haunted by it. And I hesitate to like make her, I'll say like, hey, Suzanne, can I have a copy of that? But I know that it would make her like start a new draft. And I don't want to put her through that torment because you can't say you love one of her poems without her trying to fix it. It's like, no, I said I love it. You don't have to rewrite it, but I wouldn't even know what it was called. But
I think it was called Her
but
Lover
that's something we
Forgot.
need to fix. Sorry.
Was it Her Lover Forgot?
Yeah.
Is that it?
Okay.
I think it was.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. But a
Thank you.
lot of the one that she read earlier about men in Lansing, I remember that as a vivid, live poem. So yeah.
Thank you. This question is for Suzanne. Did the overturning of Roe versus Wade inspire your current collection, or was it more the exploration mining of your past?
I think it was a little bit of both, but it was definitely Roe v. Wade being defeated. I just thought I needed to write a cautionary tale. I needed to write something about what happens to a life when you get, as I said in my intro, I guess, like hijacked. Your life gets hijacked and the trajectory changes. And it maybe isn't a bad trajectory in the end, but it's like everything you plan to do wasn't that life. Everything you plan to do gets blown out of the water. And women have no control over reproduction. And they're the ones who get stuck. You know, I was, yeah.
Thank you. Meg asks, Chicago in the 1990s and earlier makes me think of Gwendolyn Brooks, a true force in Chicago and worldwide. Please talk about any encounters you had with her/her work. And that's for both of you.
Well, okay, I was really lucky when I got to Chicago to encounter Gwendolyn Brooks early on. She was always doing public things here in the city. Anytime she had a chance to like give away money to young people, she would have like a giant reading and a contest, and the kids would read poems, and she'd give away $100 bills and stuff. She was an amazing person. But she heard me. I won the first ever Gwendolyn Brooks Open Mic Award, which happened in the summer of 1993. That was one of those things where she gave some money to a local literary poetry organization called the Guild Complex and said, let's just have a wild one night reading of poems. Everybody reads one poem, and at the end of the night, we give somebody $500. And there were 88 readers. Everybody had to read a poem of like 3 minutes or less. I was number 13 on the list, and at the end of the night, I got the money. And Gwendolyn Brooks, the first time I ever met Gwendolyn Brooks, she handed me a little envelope that had five $100 bills in it. And it was pretty amazing. And then after that, she was really kind to me and offered, when I had a book coming out, she offered to give me a blurb on my first book, The Feathered Heart, and then also gave me access to her engagement agent. So kind of got me rolling with, getting known, out in the world, for doing readings and things. And to the point where me doing readings of my work became part of my income. So Gwendolyn was amazing. An amazing lioness of a human being, just, and beyond the work. I mean, I went from like a guy working in West Texas, like hanging doors and windows on people's houses, to arriving in Chicago and I'm hanging out with Gwendolyn Brooks. I mean, what the hell was that about? So
Yeah,
things changed pretty quick
that.
for me.
Yeah, that happened right away. I think that was in the first 6 months that you were in Chicago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I counted the votes that night, by the way. Did you know that?
Oh, I didn't. So that's how I won.
counted the
You were one of
votes,
the vote
yeah.
counters.
Yeah, that's why you won. It's Chicago, what can I say?
I just need to say now I've had a student from DePaul who won the Gwendolyn Brooks Open Mic Award.
Huh.
She won like sometime in the early teens. Yeah. So that was fun.
Suzanne, did you have any do you want to add anything to that?
Well, just one thing. I recently read a poem that she wrote that was just astounding, and it was about her own abortions that she had. And it just went places that were amazing in this poem. And I can't tell you specifically because it's a while since I read it, but I'm going to reread it because it was just wonderful. And for someone in the public eye, as she was, to say that, to talk about it, she obviously wanted people to know and to know that it happens and you can get past it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, there was a person. There was a person who didn't care what other people thought.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Yeah, about stuff. Yeah, I mean, not that she didn't consider other people, but I mean, she wasn't concerned about offending or who she might offend or something she might say that people didn't want to read about or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, she wouldn't be who she was. She wouldn't have been who she was if she wasn't like that.
We only have
Here's a funny little thing. Here, can I give you one little funny thing?
Sure.
She invited me to be a reader at one of these things where she was giving away money, and I said, okay, what do you want me to do? And she said, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to inspire those kids. And I said, okay, well, like, how should I dress? Is it kind of, jeans? Okay. And she said, Mark, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to inspire those kids. And I finally realized she was just saying, shut up, show up, and, inspire the kid. Like, well, I don't care what you dress like. I was worried that was her, but that was very Ojibwe, actually, of her, very Anishinaabe, for her to teach me that lesson in a very stern elder sort of way.
Such cool stories. We're down to 2 minutes. I would really like to just read off Laurel's question. And if you have anything really quick, and then I think Becca is going to do the drawing for your books. So Laurel asks, Suzanne, I'm interested in what you said about wondering who to invite to this event, about exposing this side of yourself. Do you mean what's behind the poetry, the backstory, or just the chatting aspect, which opens you up in a different way than people who know you in this process event with the longtime relationship with Mark?
I think it's the backstory, I would say. And as I said, I didn't read some of the poems that I was most uncomfortable about sharing. So I didn't really come through on that. But yeah, and doing it now, the next time will be easier. I guess, I don't do a lot of public reading these days. I used to do a lot, but not these days. So yeah,
You should. You're very good at it.
thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to Becca.
Yes. So I used a random picker generator for the 8 people who have put in questions tonight. And Exploding Chihuahuas is going to go to Trish NYC. I'm sure you can send me your address or email address. And then the Double Vision Reflections on the Coastal Forest and the City We Love goes to Ellen Austin Lee. So thank you for asking questions and participating, and thanks to our guests for providing these wonderful copies to our guests. That's just really special. And I think as we wrap up, I would love if everyone would like to unmute and say hi and give a round of applause to Mark and Suzanne for sharing their time with us.
Bravo.
Yeah.
That's great. Oh, yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Yay,
much.
thank
This was
you.
wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. So great.
Lisa, thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.